Welcome to How Not to DM. I'm your host, Derek. I'm on a quest to interview the very best dungeon masters on this plane of existence. Today, I'm talking to Josie, the DM of the actual play podcast Short Quest, Long Rest, a weekly show playing through the Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign. Josie has an incredible grasp on encounter design and is a skilled narrator of the scenes her party find themselves in. Her abilities, along with the rest of the cast, result in episodes that are engaging and very well produced. Enjoy!
Amongst ourselves, we call ourselves Squalor. It's sort of like an in joke because we try and do something that's good. I am a baker currently, former Navy fire controlman. I am working on a bachelor's in television, film, new media, specifically production. Started podcasting just for fun, and it is actually kind of something that we're super invested in.
So you've done a couple of podcasts in your past, but tell us about how you got into D&D in the first place.
So I was introduced to D&D piecemeal, sort of through failed attempts by friends initially to get 3.5 campaigns started. I did a brief dip into 4E, where I was going to the local library and meeting with a group there that were teaching me. And finally stuck the landing with 5th edition. I went through a lot of the same awkward stages people do with the game. I was at one point the edgelord, the lone wolf assassin, the murder hobo. You know, when you're new, you just think that everything you make is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Looking back on myself in the early days of my D&D experience, there's that odd mixture of, oh, you sweet baby, and oh, there's so much cringe there, oh.
Yeah, it sounds like the greatest hits there. The edgelord, the murder hobo, the lone wolf, you went through all the phases.
Yeah, and I went through them rapid fire because to become a good D&D player, you have to know what quote-unquote good D&D is. There's no perfect game. Mm-hmm. But there is understanding yourself and your relationships with people, and D&D kind of forces you to really confront how you interact in a team environment that, even some jobs don't give you that opportunity, so...
True. So what is your DMing experience like then? You said you kind of tried to start a few games in a few different systems, but when did you ultimately say, I'm taking the step behind the screen, I'm in control?
I never started running 3.5 or 4E. That was purely friends inviting me to games and them just, the bottom falling out. 5th edition is where I started, and I chiefly started with the Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign, specifically the Summer Path, if you're familiar at all with that.
Waterdeep Dragon Heist has 4 different versions of the game you can play, right, for each season?
Yes, and Summer, by far my favorite. Not purely because I picked it first. I had run a lot of one-shots, and I'd done a couple of small campaign stuff, but this was truly my first time doing a module. It was also my first time doing Adventures League. I'd actually showed up to be a player, and instead of, oh, hey, I'm just gonna sit down at this table with 8 or 9 other people and watch this DM struggle, there was a general request from the guy running the Adventures League, hey, we need DMs. Can anyone volunteer? Let me go buy a book from the counter, give me 5 minutes, and let's get started, eh?
Did they at least give you a discount?
Yeah.
Good. So how did Squalor, how did Short Quest Long Rest start off? How's it going? And where did you come up with your unique intro and your spin on the Icewind Dale and the Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign setting?
We had initially started recording before the Icewind Dale module was released. I had been following and have long followed James Hayek's work on D&D Beyond, and he was doing something really very interesting where he was kind of doing a dark comedy mini-series up to the release of Icewind Dale where, you could start players off at level 1, and here's a adventure to take them from the city of Luskan to the Dale. And so I have to give him full credit for a lot of those early ideas. As far as the path that my players followed actually getting to the Dale. I then, as they got further into it, started folding that Icewind Mail series into Icewind Dale, able to transition seamlessly. The in-joke with Icewind Mail is that every single person that they are delivering packages to or for are actually villains or prominent characters in other earlier campaign modules. So you're delivering a package for Jarlaxle, you're delivering a package for the Black Spider. Every villain in D&D canon is like, hey, can you deliver this to this one frozen place that hardly anyone goes to, but we specifically need you to?
Yeah, that is pretty funny. It's like the villain convention or something.
You would think that Waterdeep itself would be Fantasy LA. Luskin is Fantasy LA. All the big names see each other on the street and kind of wave and go on their way. As for how Squalor started, Dane and I, who does a lot of our editing, all of our editing, I love the man. Remember I was saying earlier that I did a lot of playing on voice servers for different streamers, etc. I had at the time transitioned from ARC to Conan Exiles, and I was doing text-based roleplay there. He and I wound up in the same Discord for that server, and we were talking about different projects we were doing. And we both realized that we had this shared interest in podcasting, and we're like, hey, why don't we start up a campaign together? He knew the right people to bring in. I was willing to DM, and that is how we got started.
I feel like as far as your DMing style is concerned, and I mentioned this to you as we were kind of chatting about collaborating, it almost reminded me of being in 5th grade and sitting there and listening to my teacher read us The Hobbit. You know, it was just a very narrative style, and it was very immersive from the get-go. That's one thing I've noticed that you're really good at, is setting the scene and immersing the players. But what are some of the other things that you think you bring to the table that are unique and interesting?
I'm honestly doing what every other DM out there is doing. I'm telling stories. As for how I tell them, I believe my pacing comes both from being an avid devourer of audiobooks, having practice in conveying what a character is thinking or feeling through my voice through, again, online role-playing, and even before that, text-based role-playing. There was even a time for about 2 or 3 years where I was playing a text-based roleplay. Every member on that forum was a member of the nobility, and the only way we communicated with one another was not through writing these very intricate scenes, but through letter writing, where your entire goal was to try and sway them to your way of thinking. And whoever sort of had the most number of supporters by the end of a certain period on the server was sort of the new royal. That was a lot of fun for probably the most nerdiest subset of history nerds. Additionally, an avid addiction to Jack London, his books Call of the Wild and White Fang. A lot of Philip Pullman. The Golden Compass actually influences both how I describe the North, and especially the Aurora, and how I handle familiars. And I can also thank Anne McCaffrey for how I handle dragons. Miri is an Anne McCaffrey dragon with a little more pizzazz.
As far as the combat strategies that you employ, you talked to me a lot about some of the books that have been big influences on you. So for everyone listening, what are the ways that you make combat engaging and interesting? And what are some of your big influences and strategies?
My biggest influence in strategy would be Keith Amon's blog and book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. I think it's a dungeon master's best friend. He writes a lot about how when you look at a monster stat block, you shouldn't just be seeing strength, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, etc. You should be deriving personality based not only on that, but a combination of that, their abilities, and their description of environment. Think of these as actual creatures that are part of the ecology of this world. And that's not so different as to how you would think of a player. If your character is low wisdom, they're not going to pick up on a lot. They're not going to be making the wisest choices. And so you make that reflect in your monster. If your monster is low wisdom, it's going to take longer to realize, oh crap, I'm overwhelmed, I'm in danger, I need to flee the battlefield. Whereas a high intelligence creature that also has a high wisdom is going to be far more likely to spend a long time studying and stalking the party.
Yeah, instead of it just being like spontaneous combat because there should be an encounter, considering exactly where all of these creatures fit into the world and then deciding how to weave them into your games that way. That's some high-level stuff, and I love it.
One source he hasn't covered yet, and I really want to see him tackle it, is Kobold Press's Creature Codex and both the Tome Beasts 1 and 2. If you're a DM, absolutely, those are books to get your hands on. They scratch a lot of itches that official content doesn't. If you're looking for additional fae, additional celestials, fiends, etc., if you're looking for stuff based on different world mythologies, they have you covered. One of my favorite examples that you can apply Amon's principles to is a quote-unquote plant monster. It's actually a celestial from the Creature Codex. It is a flower called the Ecstatic Bloom, this huge creature with glowing petals that can telepathically communicate with everyone within 120 feet. And it gives off this aura of calm and serenity. This is a plant with a 20 intelligence and a 19 wisdom. And its descriptors are all about how it is very, very fatherly to all the other plants that it sort of helps to grow around it. It's a healer. It has an AoE healing ability. It can detect whether you are good or not. It can stun people who are not of good alignment if it chooses. And my favorite thing about this thing is, in addition to its ability to heal and to communicate telepathically, it shoots laser beams.
As all good flowers do. I can think of 100 different things to do with that kind of monster, but I love that you're thinking about it, being a patron or whatever it might be. That's very creative.
I would love to see it be a pastor in someone's D&D campaign's church.
You've talked a little bit about looking into these monster stat blocks and kind of determining how to best use them. Walk us through the process of planning one of your most recent combats and how you kind of incorporated these things while also making sure to keep the encounter balanced.
If I'm going to be building an encounter from scratch, my encounters are higher CR than the DMG would suggest. And that is because, your best guide for how to build your encounters is to look at your party. If you build an encounter and you're just so proud of it and you throw it up against 5 or 6 different groups, as a fellow DM, every single one of those groups is going to handle that encounter differently. Some are going to struggle, some are not. You have to be flexible. And a big part of that comes from making sure everyone has something to do. If you're throwing ranged creatures at the party, something that can't be reached very easily, whether it's flying, whether it stays up high on ledges, whether it has a climb skill and it's skittering on the ceiling. If you have a solid fighter, like our boy Krellick, our lad does not have ranged options aside from maybe picking up a rock and hucking it. Am I building my encounter for the people around him, or am I going, okay, so in the module, this encounter is not written to have something that he can easily access. If I'm keeping this encounter true to the module, I'm going to have to give him something else to do. So now, where am I putting that creature? Or if it is in a designated location with a battle map in the module, what environmental factors am I adding, or strategic choices of the enemy am I adding to make him feel like he is contributing?
These are great steps to go through. Nothing's worse than being a player in a combat and realizing that you have nothing to do because you can't reach or you're not, athletic or strong enough to get to whatever tier they're fighting on. So I love that you think about inclusiveness for your players' sake and not necessarily trying to break the module or whatever, but how, what can I add in?
Yeah, probably, environmental factors are huge and so many people disregard them. If you are fighting in a thunderstorm, the enemies are flying, are there lightning strikes and where are those landing? Are these creatures holding metal weapons? Does a bolt of lightning land a little too close and maybe stun that creature and it tumbles out of the sky and now, your tanky guy has an opportunity to take a couple hits on it before it regains its feet and gets back up? Are the party then using that knowledge to their advantage? Or specifically in Icewind Dale, let's say the party is crossing a frozen lake. If someone is paying attention to the way that I'm describing a scene, I might describe crossing the ice. You're able to hear the snaps and the pings of it underfoot.
Slowly building the tension.
You're reminding them that the environment is destructible.
As far as keeping things balanced, then what's kind of your best advice on that?
Keep your creature's behavior consistent with how they would behave. Again, applying Amon's principles. If a creature has low wisdom, it's not going to be very perceptive. Once it's locked onto a target, it's going to want to kill target. But if it is a moderately wise creature or perceptive creature, I imagine creatures like that to have a high prey drive.
What are some of the worst mistakes you have made as a DM? A big thing I love learning is what terrible things people have done and then how to not do those myself.
A big part of why I sometimes get anxiety about DMing is when you make those little mistakes that your players catch, it may not even be something that you immediately catch. But I'm sure you occasionally get those little red flags that pop up in your brain of like, oh, I shouldn't have said that way, or oh, I misinterpreted this part of the module, and now I've somehow, through a minor change that I made, affected stuff way down the line. I had this happen in that Waterdeep campaign that I ran off the cuff.
What are some of your favorite memories of improv or combat or role play from games that you've run?
My favorite moment of improvisation was something I described as the macabre ball pit. It's really funny because when we're playing the game, the players in our Discord will be posting GIF reactions to things that I'm saying, of occasionally glancing in there and, getting thrown off my descriptions by something that has amused me. And in this particular instance, Krellick had waded chest deep into a bunch of undead enemies, just this pile of bits and bone and etc. And he was going to town with his hammers, just hurling them left and right, decimating this entity. And the GIF that someone had posted as sort of like an example of what he probably looked like was of a gorilla in a kiddie pool, spinning in circles, throwing water around all excitedly. And I was like, that's our boy. He reminds me of a child in a McDonald's ball pit. And now it's canon, the macabre ball pit.
What lessons should other DMs take away from your favorite moments and the moments that you remember the most? What's the advice that you can distill from that to them?
Expand on your vocabulary. You may not be the best narrator, but if you have a large repertoire of words to pull from and you're trying to use them improvisationally off the cuff, eventually your brain will come up with a winner. You can't let yourself be paralyzed by the ones that don't work out, the mistakes that you do make, because eventually you're going to hit gold.
What are your parting words of wisdom and encouragement to all of the new and aspiring DMs out there?
I think the very first one, roll in the open.
Uh-huh.
Your players will know and respect that you are as much at the whim of the dice gods as they are. You force yourself to focus more on an enemy's strengths and weaknesses and to play to those when your dice can affect them as opposed to behind the screen. On the flip side of that, one thing that we've started doing, and thankfully we have to make death saving throws very rarely, those are rolled by me and those are rolled in private. And if you can work out a way where you can timestamp those attempts, even better. If a player is lying there dying and they don't know whether they have succeeded on a check or not, and neither do their teammates, you continue to get more authentic reactions from them than if they did know that information.
You're the second person to come on the podcast and give that exact advice, and for a very good reason. Because, like you said, for realism's sake, they don't know whether or not they're going to live or die. And so what is the party, or what should be the party's reaction, is to go and help them as quickly as possible, regardless, right?
Similarly, if you're going to be rolling in the open and taking death saving throws into private, minimize or eliminate your social roles between party members. And this is a bit of advice that I've seen online elsewhere, so I can't take credit for it. But your players are trying to tell a story, and you don't want to be the type of DM where your roles are hindering the story rather than helping it. Have an expectation going in before a game even starts that if players are going to argue, keep it in character, and keep in mind their motivations as a character and their end goals for that argument. If they are arguing about which direction to go down a road from your character's perspective, which is the best way to go. If they're taking too long to really come to a conclusion, ask prompting questions. Player A, do you feel that your character, not you, would be persuaded by their arguments? If they can't come to a decision, either A, make the roll happen anyway, because that is just a mechanical way, a shorthand of solving it so that you can actually move on with the narrative, or B, apply some outside pressure. Whether that be if they're at a crossroads trying to decide which way to go. Is that an enemy I hear coming through the trees? Is that a caravan of merchants coming up from behind that are, we're going to be taking this left branch towards town, if you're looking for work, we'll hire you to guard our caravan the rest of the way. Here's a down payment.
Where can people find your work on the internet? And then what other projects are you working on other than Short Quest Long Rest?
Let's see. You can find us at SQLR Pod on Twitter. You can also Google search us. We are on Podbean, Short Quest Long Rest. Eric, Adam, and Dane, Rian, Felgren, and Krellick, the reason that we were able to transition so smoothly into doing SQLR podcast together is they were already a working team together on a project called Nexus Watch, a science fiction multiverse story that is worth listening to. Additionally, I am still part of, but we're no longer recording, Big Dice Energy.
You mentioned stuff you were doing at your university with LGBTQ plus people as well. The project itself, is it something that you have started? Is it something you're working on with other people?
Yeah, so actually it's a small one. For my script writing course, I did a documentary script. As our midterm, we were told, hey, find a subject that you want to do a documentary about, do 3 interviews, and write a script for it. And I decided to tackle LGBTQ plus identity and Dungeons and Dragons and how those 2 worlds overlap. So I found some volunteers on Twitter and thankfully one of my friends in one of the games that I play in, and sat down, interviewed, did transcripts, talked about not only their experience with D&D and representation in media, but their own stories and how they were able to explore that at the table. Even just talking about, tell me about your experiences with D&D. What is the baseline here for then using that as a platform to explore questions of identity?
Thanks so much for joining us, Josie.
And thank you for having me on, Derek. It's been a lot of fun. Sorry to rattle your ear off at times.
It's all right. That's what I expect. That's what we're here for. Thanks for joining us on How Not to DM. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share the podcast with your friends and family around your table. For episode guest announcements, link to our Discord community, blog, and social media accounts, visit @HN2DM on Twitter. If there's a DM out there who you think would be cool to hear from on the show, email us at hownottodm@gmail.com and we'll be in touch. Our awesome intro and outro music is by my good friend Torin. And until next time, roll some nat 20s for me.